think as we're waiting for more questions, I did see a few of them while we're in the general room. And a lot of them would have to do with the D3 waiver, and we're in the process. Do you file that? That is a good question. So for the waiver for the green card, which again, I mentioned it has a different standard. For that one, you can actually file it inside the United States, and you can wait for it to be approved before you leave. For the D3 waiver, you actually have, and it's not even an application, it's more of a request, a written request that you basically give to the consulate officer during your interview. So unfortunately, you have to wait until you do that, and until you leave for your interview in order to give that request. Um, but yeah, as I mentioned, I haven't seen from the folks that we worked with, all of them have been approved. We had our first approval during this administration. Obviously, it's also just something that we're continuing to eye because this administration is crazy. Um, but so far, so good. Um, and again, the D3 waiver, as long as you have a bachelor's degree and you're coming to work using that degree, and mostly we're talking about H-1Bs, then those have been pretty successful.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Um,
We do have a question in the chat, I think specifically from someone in this room, asking about nursing professionals,
yes,
specifically with TPS, and if there is a way for them to be sponsored.
yeah, for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and just, I created a little mini presentation for our session just on healthcare and nurses that I'll go ahead and start sharing now. But basically, yeah, I think the short answer is yes. Um, Obviously, I think we're talking about mostly, or yeah, all of this applies to not just DACA recipients, so TPS folks can also um, qualify for these. But yeah, let's first talk about some examples of, people in the healthcare who could qualify for an H-1B. Um, when we're looking at nurses, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that not all nurses might qualify for an H-1B. So generally, most registered nurses won't qualify. And why is that? I don't know if you remember Miguel talking about that the position needs to require a bachelor's degree for you to fulfill your job duties. And it normally in the field has to also be required. So for registered nurses, generally speaking, they require an associate's degree and not a bachelor's degree. So that's why, your typical registered nurse might not be eligible for an H-1B, but more specialized nurses might be. So this includes nurse practitioners, clinical specialists, nurse managers. So again, like these are positions that require generally most of these are master's degrees, but some of them do require bachelor's. And so when we're looking at an H-1B, again, it's about the degree, and whether it's required for that job. Um, for doctors, so doctors can obviously be really good examples of positions that could be eligible for an H-1B. And we've seen that residents, so you don't have to necessarily be a doctor yet. Residents could also be sponsored as long as you complete the last step in your residency. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And again, H-1B is all about the degree. Not all of them are. So the green card, for example, we don't look at the degree, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But any questions before I move on to the next section about nurses or doctors?
There are several questions in general, Krishna. So why don't you just go through some of the slides, and then we can just save the last
Okay,
minutes for questions.
sounds good. So outside of nurses and doctors, there are other positions in healthcare. These are all just examples. So physical therapists, we find that there's a labor shortage in physical therapists. So those are pretty good candidates for an H-1B. Occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, medical researchers and scientists, pharmacists. So these are just some examples. Again, it's all about the degree. So does this position need at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent for you to get that job? So you can find that there are more positions in the healthcare industry, but these are kind of the more common ones that we see when we're looking at the H-1B. Um, And so now let's talk about the O1A. So Miguel mentioned, like that you can either obtain a really recognized degree, like or award, I should say, like a Nobel Peace Prize, or you can show that you meet three or of 10 different criteria, basically showing that you have a sustained national or international acclaim. And so he mentioned this. This is basically you're showing that you have extraordinary ability. And here we're looking at sciences and education or business, most likely. And I've seen a few DACA recipients being able to get an O1A. So it's something that some of you might be eligible for, if not now, in the future. I think when we're talking about these options, we're also talking about the ability to go back to school or to like now the criteria. Now you're like, okay, now I can work towards possibly being eligible in the future. So for the O1A, I've listed 8 of the 10 criteria. So awards. So it doesn't have to be a Nobel. If you receive a Nobel Peace Prize or something that big, then you don't even have to worry about this criteria. But if you have lesser known awards that are still kind of like national or recognized in your field, that could be something that you can show to prove that you meet extraordinary ability. If you have contributions that are original in your field, that could be also something that you can submit as evidence. Media about you. So I've seen outside of the healthcare, but like I said, there are a few DACA recipients who were able to get an O1A. A lot of media were about them. A lot of these are well-known activists, organizers who have a lot of published media attention. So that's something that they submitted. Um, if you have critical roles in distinguished institutions, so say you work for a really well-known university, for example, or a really well-known company, things like that, that could also be evidence. If you judge the work of others in the field, so for example, academics are always doing peer reviews of other people who are writing scholarly articles, that could also be evidence. If you yourself are writing articles, that could also be a criteria. Um, if you receive high salary compared to others in your field, that could also be one of the criteria. And then lastly, if you are a member um, in important associations in your field, and again, you have to just meet 3 of these criteria. You don't have to meet all of them, but and this is where you talk to an attorney to see if you can make the argument. I'm always working with folks to try to figure out ways to make the arguments. It might be an award that isn't recognized by everybody, but it might be a big deal in your field, and it's something that we can prove to the government that in your field this award matters or things like that. Um,
Krishna,
all right, so
just to be mindful of time, because we have about 8 minutes
yeah,
before
yeah.
we go to the next.
This is the last slide. So then lastly, so green card. So Doug mentioned that there are ways for you to just apply for the green card right away. And usually that's kind of similar criteria to the O1A where you are kind of at the top of your field or the stuff that you're doing is really important nationally. But if you're not doing that, then usually the employer has to go through advertisements and basically show the government that there's no other US worker that's able, willing, qualified, or available to take on that position. But even if you have to go through that process, basically the federal government has recognized labor shortages in the healthcare industry, or if you are specifically a physical therapist or a professional nurse, again, these are not registered nurses, but those that require at least a bachelor's, they have said that they have predetermined that there are no US workers for these positions. So you don't have to go through that process of advertisement. You can just apply straight for the green card and bypass it. So that's something important to keep in mind for if you're considering healthcare occupations or you're already in one. Those are the two that are that would allow you to get a green card pretty much right away. So with that, I think that is it. Just wanted to leave you with some resources. Obviously, I mentioned us, pad to papers, we can do consults. And now we're basically opening it up to dreamers generally. It used to be DACA recipients. And also, we prioritize the San Francisco Bay Area, but everyone could submit an interest form regardless of where you're located. And based on capacity, we'll assess if we can do your consult. So check out our website. And then these other websites too, our websites are organizations that help healthcare workers. If you are looking for an employer to possibly sponsor you, these organizations help you get paired up with someone who's looking for an H-1B nurse, for example, or another
I
healthcare
didn't
worker.
ask if you were friendly. I didn't
So
ask
yeah,
if
with
you're
that,
friendly. When you're concerned about somebody, you don't have to be friendly.
I asked that everybody mute themselves. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Krishna. I'm going to go through the chat now. We did have a couple of questions, and I'm hoping within the next 5 minutes we could sort of go through some of these.
yeah.
The first question is, can someone with a master's degree who is already living in the US working in STEM and healthcare be eligible for an EB-2 employment-based visa? Now, I just want to remind everyone, this is general sort of information, general advice. We always want you to speak with someone specifically to find out about your situation.
Yeah, I think that I mean, generally speaking, yes, there could be ways for you to be eligible for the B2 visa. But that being said, we would have to look at whether whether you have to go through the perm process, meaning the advertisement, or you can just bypass it. And I mentioned one of the ways is being a physical therapist or a specialized nurse. But if you're not in those fields, there are other ways to bypass it, and it's if you can show that your work is in the national interest of the United States. So that's what the national interest waiver that Doug was talking about was all about.
Um, Someone asked, does a certified nursing assistant qualified as skilled labor?
Um, that is a good question. I think what you would have to do, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's really about the field, whether it requires you to. I don't know if you remember your job description when you first applied, where it required you to have at least a bachelor's degree. So I would go back and look at that. If not, you can just look online and see if that specific job requires at least a bachelor's degree in the field.
How about lab techs for specialty occupations in healthcare?
Lab techs usually do, I would say usually do require at least a bachelor's degree. I've seen many researchers who are in healthcare, and usually those are in the field. It's required for you to have a bachelor's degree.
Um,
Um, are are you able to do an MD, PhD program with only an I-10? So the I-10 is about taxes, so it's not about an MD or PhD. Oh, but I see what you're saying, because usually undocumented folks, in order to do your residency, and you have to be work authorized. So yeah, that is a thing that I think right now it depends on each state. And for the most part, you have to have employment authorization to complete your MD. But I know that there's some advocacy going on in different states to change that requirement because it's, as you all know, you get certified by each state's board. So they're trying to change that. At least here in California, they're doing advocacy so that you can be undocumented and still complete your MD or your PhD. That's not a requirement. You can complete your PhD without having to have work authorization. Can a business management degree who wants to start a supplement company qualify for an H-1B? And that's a good question. So basically, with most of these options, you have to be employed. So you can't basically, it is harder if you are yourself owning the company. Like you can't self sponsor yourself for the H-1B specifically. So for that, you need an employer to sponsor you as an employee, and it has to be a full-time position. Um, can a nurse with a BSN get an H-1B? Yes, absolutely. That is one of the most common ones. So again, as long as it's a bachelor's degree is required, and nurses with a Bachelor of Science and nursing qualifies for an H-1B.